Almost nobody understood why I bought a Swift Sport. Then everyone gets it. The penny drops, and especially when they're the ones driving.
1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to Petrol Poodle in 2021. Slowly coming out of our lockdown, and I'm back doing car reviews again, and it feels good. Now, you're probably thinking, Suzuki. Okay, no, that's fine, I get it, because quite honestly, a few years ago, I'd seen these driving around. It's like a day in my tiz. It meant nothing to me. When I was changing cars in 2016, selling my Golf GTI, a Mark 5, so that was remapped to 240 brake horsepower. I remember reading amazing things about this car, that it was the most underestimated little gem, and that people who'd owned all sorts of fun sports cars absolutely raved about this. Pocket rocket this, most fun I've had in a car that. So it had some massive praise to follow. Here's the interesting bit. When I first drove this car, I thought it was terrible. I mean, honestly, it was the most disappointed I've ever been on a test drive. So I went from walking away feeling like I'd wasted my time to, little would I realise, 2 years later, and a few other cars later, I actually ended up buying one of these in this colour, 5-door, and I owned it for 2 years. So this actually became my favourite car I've ever owned. And I'll quickly put on screen for some context the other cars I've had, just to give you an idea of what it's up against. For context, I'm going to be giving you the journey of how I ended up coming to this. Now, for those of you who want to skip straight to the review, time codes are interior, driving, blah, 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 some conclusions and stuff like that. So if you're really impatient, skip to those. But I do think it's an important part of the story, because I ended up going from hating this car to absolutely loving it. Now, I promised some context as to why this car ended up in my life at all. Well, I was absolutely just done with car repairs. I was just done with bills. The Mark 5 GTI, I think I lost 2.5 grand on that in 6 months of ownership. It was just headache. It was a headache after a headache. BMW 3-owner car at 46,000 miles. It'd been garaged every winter. It was immaculate. That car cost me 5.5 grand to run for a year. So I realised my monthlies were £300 a month in fuel, let alone the 450 repairs here, 600 repairs there, 500 repairs here on that BMW. I just realised my monthlies, I could be doing a lot more with £300 a month. My dad ended up with one of these, and I drove it and discovered I was massively wrong. I'm going to reveal why later when I'm actually driving. Lovely. Right, here we go. So this is what I love about the Suzuki Swift Sport. Now, it's one of the very few cars where I wish my manufacturer would do this. They just gave you everything. So there are no optional extras. It's got everything. So what does that include? You've got air conditioning, you've got Bluetooth, you've got sat-nav. On the point of sat-nav, 2014, I believe, was when they became standard. Before then, you've got kind of a bit of an old-fashioned looking CD player. That was fine, that's what I had, and it cost me, I don't know, 250 quid to replace that with a much nicer Pioneer head unit. You've got keyless entry. You've got, did I say cruise control? You've got a leather trim steering wheel with this nice little kind of red stitching. These sports seats, they may not look that special, but they're actually bloody awesome. They really do squeeze you nicely. They're super comfy for long journeys. Okay, you've heard me raving about the Swift Sport, but let's be real. For some people, this interior is not that special. And I get it, you know, it doesn't have the finesse of a nice German car. It's not quite up there with the Mazdas and other things and Hondas. It's not bad at all. You quickly acclimatise to this and get used to it. And bear in mind that I did leave a 3 Series with cream leather seats and all the rest of that jazz for this. I stopped caring pretty damn quickly. So for something which came out in 2012 for £4,000 with relatively good interior, I actually think it makes a really strong case for itself. As I said, the only thing you have to think about is colour, and from 2013 onwards, you can get these in a 5-door. I'm gonna be quick on this one. It makes a big difference whether you go for the 3-door or the 5-door. I think, indisputably, the 3-door looks way better than the 5, and those are the ones that you're gonna start hoovering up at £4,500. The boot, that is worth talking about. The boot is tiny in this car. It never really was a problem for me. I always got a week's shopping in there. I could stack suitcases in there. It's not as bad as it looks. But I could always just swing open the rear doors on the 5-door and just chuck stuff across the rear seats. The 3-door is a 4-seater. They don't have a middle seat in the back. In the 5-door, they managed to just about squeeze a belt in here, so useful if you legally want to carry. Well, compared to that BMW that I loved with its 3-litre, 231 brake horsepower engine, this thing was 600 kilos lighter. And any hot hatch, a Golf GTI these days is 250 kilos heavier than this car. It's an unbelievably lightweight little thing, this. So as soon as you drop this thing a cog and you're down to second or third or whatever, and you plant your foot, the car just reacts immediately. It is so reactive to your inputs, this car. It's hilarious fun. And I can't stand the cliche of drives like a go-kart, but when you look at the layout of this car and you look at where the engine sits behind the front wheels, you've got all 4 wheels are at the corners of the car. All the weight is contained within those wheels. It's no wonder this thing drives so amazingly well. What most people don't realise about the Swift chassis is that the Mk2 Swift Sport, which was a massive success, that car actually ended up being incredibly successful in rally, and it was a massive fan favourite at the Nürburgring as well. So people don't realise when they see a Suzuki badge and a little kind of city car with a little spoiler and its twin exhausts and tinted windows, they just don't have a clue that this car has been engineered by people who really care about what a fun, fast car should feel like. Okay, I touched on the word fast there, didn't I? That's a bit risky with only 134 brake horsepower we're talking about, but when you've got 1,045 kilos to push around, revving out at 7,000 RPM, this absolute gem of an engine, it actually feels a lot quicker than it sounds. And I urge you not even to think about the 0 to 60. Once you're actually moving, this is where this car comes alive. It's a momentum car. Once you're up to speed and you're thrashing and you've got all this time to push the engine all the way up to the highest revs, what this car will do round corners absolutely boggles the mind. And when I first bought the car I had for 2 years, almost nobody understood why I bought a Swift Sport. And everybody was kind of politely getting in the car, oh, okay, mate, nice car. But when you throw this into a bend, it utterly defies physics. And then everyone gets it. The penny drops, and especially when they're the ones driving and you say, don't brake. And they're like, what? Don't brake, just go into the corner at 50. Trust me, just do it. And they're thinking, this is going to kill me. That's when you see them just giggling like a little schoolgirl. When I was in the Brecon Beacons driving this with Lotus Exiges and, Renault Megane RS and, I don't know, Porsche 911, you name it, it was able to keep up with them in the real world on those tight little windy roads. And you're thinking, oh, what an absolute crock of shit. That is not true. Well, you've got to look at the ground clearance of this car. It has nothing to worry about. One of the weird advantages of it being actually quite high suspension is that you're never at risk of grounding the bottom of this thing out. It's kind of bouncy and compliant, and those uneven road surfaces where the firmer suspension cars with their little lip right close to the tarmac, they're not able to put the power down. They were kind of just being cautious. Or in those bends when they were braking and I could see all the brake lights were on and they clearly weren't putting any power down until closer towards the exit of a bend, I was going in with my foot flat out on these bends. Let's talk about the specifics. So, okay, electric steering, not the best in the world compared to hydraulic steering. As electric steering goes, it's plenty communicative, and I really... Look at how darty this thing is. Oh, this thing is so much fun. Anyway, so okay, so I was saying the steering is plenty communicative enough. You know, it doesn't read the road perfectly, but it's not one of those really weird, vague steering racks. And onto the little gear shift. Now, snickety is a nice little word for this. No, it hasn't got the precision of the old cliche, the rifle bolt, but it has a really nice little kind of click, click, click. They're really, really good brakes out of the box. The factory setup is fantastic, and as long as you've got a nice, relatively new set of discs and pads on there, they really bite at the top end. They're fantastic. Throttle, yes, nice and responsive little throttle pedal here. This car is just so taut, the chassis is so small, everything is, there's such little curb weight, and not waiting for a turbo to spool up and have that kind of elastic band sponginess is fantastic. There are hardly any hot hatches left now, warm or hot, whatever you want to call this, that are naturally aspirated. And okay, a lot of these little turbo cars are aspiring to get 40 or 50 mpg. Well, genuinely, I used to average 50 miles per gallon in this naturally aspirated petrol car. 50. That was perfectly achievable at all times in this car. When I was not driving around like an absolute moron, it's comfortable. It's not a super sound insulated like some other cars are, but it's good on the motorway, it's comfortable, amazing in a tight city in those horrible little spaces. It's a really, really chill place to be, and it can just do the things that matter very, very well. I'm afraid, as Henry Catchpole said, you're going to need to not have a car salesman next to you. So in COVID times, that's actually now quite an easy thing. But if you're watching this when COVID's not really so much a deal and you've got a car salesman next to you, that could be a little bit tricky. You really need to throw this car about and just have confidence when you push it. This is what completely rewired my brain entirely. Owning this car, so much fun, just that based on the handling alone. And it made everything else I've owned before feel stodgy and fat. And it really, really marked a big change in what I prioritise in a driving experience. For example, lift-off oversteer. I didn't even know what that was until I owned this car. And basically, when you're driving so fast around a bend or a roundabout that the car's starting to understeer, you just lift your right foot off the pedal a little bit, the weight shifts, and the back end, the little happy tail, will kind of skid round. Having a little four-wheel drift in a car like this is hysterical. And compared to, say, drifting a rear-wheel drive powerful car where you've actually got to have some serious skill, and to be honest, you're taking a bloody great gamble doing something like that in the first place. With this, it all kind of just falls back in place. It'll catch you. Okay, so what are the negatives? What are the actual kind of common problems you got to look out for if buying? Well, thankfully, I had a little look around and there aren't really any common problems at all. When I used to be in the owners group, there were people with 150,000 miles, 120,000 miles from new, no issues whatsoever. And people always used to come in saying, what to look out for? And all the owners would say, nothing. Now, there have been a couple of recalls. They've typically been for something built between this month and this month. Just go check through with Suzuki before you buy a car and just make sure yours has had its recalls done, if it's even affected. But the nice thing about buying a Suzuki is they are super, super, super reliable, and it is something that you shouldn't underestimate is peace of mind over interior quality, for example. It was the nicest 2 years. I never had to think about a thing, and not a single thing went wrong with my car in 2 years and 30,000 miles of driving. All you need to do is buy yourself, spend about 200, 300 pounds on a new head unit, and it will power the speakers and they sound so much better. And on top of that, obviously you can use Google Maps, Spotify and everything else in there. So it's a pretty easy wish list when you buy this car. Personally, if I were to buy one again, I would I'd put a new exhaust on it, maybe a new intake, just because I like it to feel a little bit more exciting. But it's really hard to pick faults with this car, and they are absolutely fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I'd love to know what you would do with £5,000 to £6,000 or £4,000 to £6,000 if you were to get one of these. Would you consider it? What else would be top of your list? Do let us know in the comments section, and yeah, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you for the next one.